Port scanning is another type of security attack technique, and what this involves is actually pretty simple. It just involves checking for open ports on a particular network. So what an attacker does is they go through all the available addresses on a network and look for some commonly open ports. For example, 80, 443, 8080, 25, 22. These are all ports that are usually open on systems by default. And what the attackers then do is they put together a picture. And this is not illegal. This is not actually something that in itself constitutes an attack unless it's done to excess. But it's usually an indicator that somebody might be up to something that's no good. Because in usual circumstances, nobody really needs to check for all the open ports or a large set of open ports on a system. So usually if a network administrator or a security professional records a number of port scans from a particular source IP or source system, they will make a note of it and will report it. So there's different types of port scans. So there's scans for TCP ports, there's of course UDP ports, there's SYN scans, which is where the handshake is not complete. It's actually just checking for a SYN signal according to the network protocol. And then there's something that's more esoteric called an XMOS FIN scan, which doesn't happen much anymore. And then there's something called an FTP bounce, which is where a attacker will use a port scan to see whether an incoming FTP connection is accepted or not. And there's also something called a sweep. And a sweep is exactly what it sounds like, where there's just a series of rapid connections to check for port openings. And one of the tools that is used to do port scanning is called Nmap, which stands for Network Mapper, which is why a lot of times the use of Nmap can be restricted on certain networks because it's usually only something that's required for the work of a network administrator or a security professional, and if somebody else is using it, a lot of times it's because they are trying to figure out an attack on that system. And the attackers know to look for specific ports or port ranges, as I said, and the reason for that is that they're trying to create vulnerability fingerprints. And what that means is that they'll see that certain port ranges are open or responding with specific kind of packets or messages, and that will indicate what software might be installed or what operating system might be installed on the other end of the network connection. And that gives them an idea of how to attack. And of course, the way to get around this is to not have default ports open and available unless they need to, and to also not provide too much information about what the system on the other end might be. And the way to do that is to change default functionality of software packages, and also to really put monitoring in place to make sure that once there is a number of port scan type connections being made from any one source or any one range of IP addresses, to either completely block it and not allow the activity to go on, or to at the very least throttle the activity and to make sure that the port scan is not successful. Or sometimes there's systems that will respond by flooding back garbage data in the connection that is sent back to the port scanner. And that is sort of a countermeasure to a port scanning that can be part of an attack. But once again, port scanning is usually not considered an attack. It's just not something you want to be doing to somebody else's system that you don't own and aren't responsible for.